Welcome back to We Want Picks. The PFL playoffs are going to be kicking off this weekend for the 2024 season with the first semi-final event of this one here, PFL 7, taking place on Friday, broadcast on ESPN and ESPN+. This one is going to feature the heavyweights and also the women's flyweights, and if they win this fight, then they will go on to be in the finals to compete for that $1 million PFL prize, which does happen every year with the tournament style that PFL does operate under. Now, aside from these semi-final matchups that we have on the main card, there are also some prelims with a few fighters that Bellator and PFL, of course, are trying to build up at the moment, so it should be pretty fun. It kind of seems like they've got quite a few guys from featherweight and welterweight on the card lower down. It should be pretty good. I'm Artem MMA, and I'm going to be breaking down the card for you guys on the We Want Picks channel. Now, of course, with We Want Picks, there is that $10 per month premium membership, and with that, not only do you get picks and bets from Angelo and Jacob, I also do write an article for We Want Picks every single week, talking about events that are not UFC related, which does, of course, include the PFL and LFA, and just other major events that are going to be taking place on the regional scene every single week. Now, let's get into my predictions for this PFL card. Now, I have looked everywhere, and at the time of me recording this video, which is just after UFC 304 finished, there are currently no odds out for this event, so I actually don't know if I am picking favourites or underdogs, but I do feel like, in general, this does feel like a pretty favourite heavy card, and I'm pretty sure a lot of my picks probably will be favourites. However, a pick that I think could actually end up being an underdog is this first fight of the night. It is going to be Kevin Pease fighting against Nick Meck. Both of these guys have college wrestling backgrounds. I couldn't fully really look into what level they competed at, but I believe that Nick Meck wrestled for a college called FSU, and Kevin Pease did compete in quite a few local tournaments as well. So I know that they're both wrestlers, and that makes a lot of sense because both of these guys do fight with a wrestling heavy style. Nick Meck is super aggressive. He wants to get the takedowns and he wants to control you and really dominate that first round, and that is what he has done for the majority of his career. He's found a lot of success doing so with a 7-1 record, a lot of finishes in the first round. However, if you do watch this fight here against JP St. Louis, he goes out there in the first round, gets the takedowns, gets the control, gets the ground and pound, and he completely blows his gas tank in that first round. And JP St. Louis was able to defend the takedowns in the second, and especially the third round, to end up coming out with a very close win there in that matchup. So you do have to worry about that when he fights here against Kevin Pease. Kevin Pease is also a wrestler on the feet. He's just very dangerous. He trains at a kill cliff. He throws a lot of overhands, a lot of big shots. He's a small welterweight. In fact, I would say he's quite a small welterweight, as he is 5'8" and isn't like a massive dude like Bisenguar Chomsadinov, for example. But he does have a lot of power, and he does have solid wrestling as well. The only blemish on his record is actually a win for him, but it was overturned because he was using some sort of substance, which I couldn't actually find out what it was, but it can't have been too serious, as he did return very, very quickly after that. He has looked good in all of his fights for the most part. You know, he has got a lot of finishes early. He's been doing a lot of interviews as well, which I watched quite a few of to try and really find out what his college wrestling background was. But I was quite interested in this fight here against CJ Lafragola, who is a lot better than his record suggests, an undefeated amateur. And CJ was able to find success in the wrestling. He was able to actually go out there and get takedowns against Kevin Pease. Now, ultimately, Kevin Pease ended up winning. He ended up getting his own takedowns in wrestling and control time in the second and the third round. But that first round wasn't the easiest experience for Pease. I do kind of think in this one here, Nick Meck, if he can control that cardio, or even if he's worked on that cardio, and he can control that gas tank, use that size advantage and use that aggressive wrestling style, which he does have, and not gas out, I think he can go out there and get this win here over Kevin Pease. So I think this is probably going to be an underdog prediction here, but I do think I'm going to have to go with Nick Meck. I believe that that was his biggest kind of blemish, was just that cardio, but he does have pretty decent experience. I believe for the most part people are picking Pease, 77% picked on Tapology. And now Jaleel Willis will be returning quite soon after he got knocked out by Cedric Doumbé against Anthony Ivy, who has had a very upward trajectory after getting out of the UFC. If you guys are unfamiliar with Anthony Ivy, He was very briefly in the UFC, lost to Brian Barberena and Christian Aguilera there, and then he did lose 3 fights in a row after being released from the UFC. But these losses have not aged poorly at all. Losing to Nikolai Veretennikov doesn't look too bad, as Nikolai Veretennikov gave Michael Morales a pretty tough fight on the Contender Series, and now he's been re-signed to the UFC. He's actually going to make his UFC debut. Well, not re-signed, sorry. He's been signed to the UFC to now debut against Denny Barlow. So that's not a bad loss. And then Vassell Hafez, split decision against Vassell Hafez in a very grappling-heavy fight. Vassell Hafez now, of course, gave Jack Della Maddalena one of the toughest fights of his career, and then also is now 1-1 in the UFC as he got a win after that loss to JDM. Not bad losses at all, 2 UFC fighters currently as well. The loss to Joel Bowman is probably the only bad loss, as Joel Bowman hasn't really done too much since beating Anthony Ivy, but he does fight for bare knuckle MMA, like Gamebred FC, and I believe he actually recently defeated Maki Patolo, so I guess that's pretty cool. But then after that, all of those losses, unfortunately for him, he come back, man. He's been on a massive run, and I actually kind of thought at some point we might actually see Anthony Ivy fight his way all the way back into the UFC, but he hasn't done that. He's fought his way into the PFL, so I am happy for him. Now, what Anthony Ivy is good at is actually what Jaleel Willis has struggled with the most in his career. Jaleel Willis, you look at him, he's 5'11", I guess maybe a little bit short for welterweight for some guys, but he's big. He's a big welterweight. He's quite well built for 5'11", and for the most part I would say he is a striker. But for quite a while in Bellator, he actually struggled a lot with takedown defense and grappling defense. A couple of first-round submission... I don't think there were first-round submission losses, but a couple of submission losses in Bellator. And then he did beat Kyle Crutchmer there by defending the takedowns, and he showed better takedown defense. Then he got knocked out in the first round twice in a row, and he kind of hasn't really been able to pick it up back now. Maybe he can do that, but I actually like the grappling out of Anthony Ivy here, because I think what Anthony Ivy is good at is the weakness of Jaleel Willis. I would say Jaleel Willis probably is the more dangerous striker. He probably is the better striker and the more powerful striker, but I think that Anthony Ivy can go out there and kind of exploit the weakness that we have seen in the past from Jaleel Willis and take him down and try and grapple him, which is why I'm going to side with Anthony Ivy in this matchup. And now Sergio Cossio, in my opinion, might be taking a little bit of a step down in competition here against Cedric Sanders, because Cossio just got a very impressive win over Anthony Romero, and to my surprise, he mostly did that by winning the fight on the feet. Now, Cossio is a grappler, or at least I think he's a grappler. Maybe his recent fight hasn't really proved that, but he's got a very odd striking style. The way that he fights, he has his hands by his waist, very, very low, and he moves around in kind of a pretty odd way, which I guess does kind of put off a lot of his opponents, and for the most part, I would say the way that he wins his fights is with his wrestling, and also with that grappling, which he is very good at. He has proven me wrong now, twice. I actually picked against him against Jesse Roberts, and I actually picked against him against Anthony Romero. But now I've learnt my lesson. Unfortunately, it had to be twice, and I am going to pick him to defeat Dedrek Sanders. Dedrek Sanders is a pretty dangerous guy overall. He does have submissions. He does have knockouts. A lot of them in the first round. He did recently lose to Luis Pena, and that loss is okay. Now, Luis Pena is a former UFC fighter. You may know him, and at one point he really was on the up. But I feel like now we have seen Luis Pena lose a lot more. He did lose to Terrence McKinney and Jonathan Pierce and Zach Zane, who ended up, is I think still signed to Ryzen at the moment, but he's gone through a little bit of a win streak, a lot of knockouts on the feet, but if you want my honest opinion, I don't think that he is as good as grappling as Cossio is, and I do just think that we are going to see Sergio Cossio go out there, get the takedowns, and get the submission. Now, he did spend a lot of time striking with Anthony Romero, so maybe he could spend maybe too much time on the feet in this matchup, but I think he should be pretty safe against Sanders. I think he's going to go out there and win by submission or by decision. Cody Law is actually another one of those guys from Bellator, which has been built up in Bellator, and unfortunately he did lose a couple of times. Now, he spent his whole career in Bellator, and this is what Bellator did for a long time. AJ McKee is the best example of this, a guy that Bellator signs as a talented amateur, and they build them up throughout their entire career. Now, unfortunately for Cody Law, he did run into James Gonzalez, who is a lot better than his record suggests, a very tricky fighter. And then he did lose to Chris Lencioni in a close fight, but Lencioni somehow managed to actually win that fight with grappling off of his back. Cody Law is a wrestler. He wants to get the takedowns. I don't personally rate his striking too highly, but I do think that his wrestling and his grappling and top control is the best part of his game, and I do think it's going to be good enough to defeat this opponent here, Zachary Hicks. Zachary Hicks has been a pretty active fighter. He has fought 5 times in the last 2 years, and he hasn't fought for 7 months. He does have 1 loss to Nathan Kelly, who also in the PFL, especially PFL Europe, are really trying to build up. Nathan Kelly actually headlined an event recently, which is kind of crazy, and he was submitted and taken down in that one. I do think Cody Law should be able to take down Zachary Hicks here. He is a guy that Bellator's built up for a long time. I think he still is a very talented prospect, even if he does have a couple of unfortunate blemishes on his record. I think that we are going to see Cody Law go out there, find success with the wrestling, and also win a decision with, well, the takedowns. And a fighter that fights, I guess, somewhat similar is Alexei Pergande, as he is going to take on Daniel Boehle. I think that Alexei Pergande is going to win this one here. He is, to my understanding, half Russian, half American, or at least part Russian, part American. And he trains out of Killcliff FC. He's a good wrestler. The way that he wins fights is he wants to dominate and top control, and that is how he has won his most recent fights for the most part. I guess PFL looked at what Bellator tries to do and signed a guy very early on into his MMA career, and he's just spent his whole career fighting for the PFL for the most part, aside from his amateur fights, of course, and he's looked good doing it. He's dominated a lot of fights with the wrestling, found success with a lot of fights with the wrestling, and I think he should be able to do the same thing here against this opponent, Daniel Boehle, who has a couple of good wins. A 3-2 opponent isn't a bad win, but he also does have a couple of wins over even and losing streak fighters. I think we're going to see Alexei Pergande win. One thing that I found interesting is, did this fight happen against Mike Bardsley? Because actually I don't know if it did. But that fight was meant to happen the weekend that I'm recording this event, and I'm just going to kind of assume that it didn't. I think Pergande wins. I think we're going to see him win, probably just with some sort of win, whether it's decision, submission, or ground and pound, due to that wrestling. He knows what he's good at, and that's what he does. He takes you down, and he controls on top. Tyrell Fortune is now going to be rematching Sergey Bilostenniy. If you guys are unfamiliar with this fight, these guys actually fought against each other not that long ago. It was only over a year ago when Bellator was still Bellator. Sergey Bilostenniy actually made his debut against Tyrell Fortune. And on that card, I picked Tyrell Fortune to win. And what happened? He got knocked out, but Sergey Bilostenniy hit him to the back of the head and ended up getting disqualified for those strikes. And we ended up seeing Tyrell Fortune get the win. Now, I guess what you could take away from that performance is, well, technically Sergey Bilostenniy won the fight, so he's going to win again. I'm going to pick Tyrell Fortune here. He is a very talented wrestler, and I do kind of firmly believe that that is what Sergey Bilostenniy is weak at. I think that's his biggest weakness. Now, technically, if you exclude the disqualification, he has gone undefeated for Bellator and also for the PFL. He beat the shell of Blagoy Ivanov at this point, former UFC heavyweight Blagoy Ivanov, and Kasim Araz, who is a pretty solid wrestler in his own right, I guess somewhat similar of a style. But the worry that I bring into this one here against Tyrell Fortune is actually a fight that happened a while ago, so maybe I'm looking too deep into it. But this fight here against Fernando Rodriguez Jr. Fernando Rodriguez Jr. didn't look like he was in the best shape, and he gave Sergey Bilostenniy a lot of trouble just by holding him up against the cage. And he amounted a lot of control time up against the cage in that matchup, which is why it ended up being a split decision. Yes, Sergey looked good on the feet, and yes, he did more damage, but Rodriguez was able to find that control. And that's where I look at this one. I think that Tyrell Fortune can actually out-wrestle Sergey Bilostenniy, and he needs to go to that wrestling. Yes, he lost to Daniel James. It ended up being a no contest, as Daniel James actually, I believe, failed a drug test. Actually, I'm going to just triple check that before I throw out accusations like that. But I'm pretty confident it was that Daniel James... yeah, Daniel James had some sort of drug test kind of issue there, which is why it was overturned. But in that matchup, Tyrell Fortune found a lot of success in the first round with the wrestling and the grappling. And since then, the Sergey fight happened, and he just beat Marcelo Golm, who actually headlined a Bellator event against Daniel James, if you can believe it. But that's the pick. Tyrell Fortune by wrestling, probably by decision. Sergey is a very athletic heavyweight. He is. I'm trying to think of someone else. The German guy that fought on Contender Series last year and ended up losing to that Brazilian dude that was 6-0 and just disappeared. That guy. He's kind of like that. He's athletic. He's pretty talented on the feet, but I'm going to end up siding with the wrestler and Tyrell Fortune, who I think gets the takedowns. And now we can move on to now the tournament semifinals. Taila Santos versus Liz Carmouche is the first one. I'm picking Taila Santos, and I'm not 100% confident in it, but I still do kind of like the pick even after the Jena Bishop fight. I did all I could to find that fight so I could watch it for a second time. I found highlights. I found people pretending to upload the video, and then I also found one, but I couldn't watch it in New Zealand for some reason, so that really sucked. So I will have to admit I actually haven't seen the Jena Bishop fight, aside from the few highlights and aside from the time that I watched it, which was only 5 weeks ago, so I can't remember what happened there. And then of course she beat Alawa Joanne in a very quick first round submission, very good performance there, but Alawa Joanne is just kind of like a pure striker from Bellator. Taila Santos in that fight, to a lot of surprise, to my surprise as well, actually initiated grappling against Jena Bishop, and in the first 2 rounds, she was able to win and find some control time and win that way. The second round was close, but I still don't really understand how we were able to see a judge give Jena Bishop the second round, because that was the split decision. Jena Bishop definitely won the third round, found a lot of success in the third round, but a judge gave her the second round. So I don't actually understand how that happened, but for the most part, to understand what happened in the fight, Taila Santos initiated takedowns and won with top control, and also a couple of strikes on the feet. Liz Carmouche, on the other hand, is of course the former Bellator champion, and is probably one of the favourites to win the whole thing as well, aside from, I guess everyone's got a good chance of winning, but we'll get to that in a second. Liz Carmouche, she was the Bellator champion. I thought she had a pretty decent title reign. She did beat Juliana Velasquez multiple times. Beat her, I believe, for the 3rd time in the PFL debut that she had after her fight in Bellator for the last time. And then beat Kana Watanabe. But you can't say that she didn't have problems against Kana Watanabe, because Kana Watanabe was able to showcase what she has showcased in the past in Bellator, and that is solid grappling. We saw a pretty deep arm triangle choke that Kana Watanabe had on Liz Carmouche, and then Liz Carmouche was able to throw up an armbar from bottom. I believe the armbar was thrown up from bottom, and yeah, Watanabe was in the dominant position. She lost it due to that submission, and then Carmouche obviously won the fight. So we've seen Carmouche out-grappled before. Taila Santos is not a small woman's flyweight at all. In fact, I would say that she probably is up there as one of the bigger girls in this weight class. She does have a lot of muscle. She's 5'6" as well, but Liz Carmouche is still pretty small, I would say. I think we're going to see Taila Santos go out there and kind of do the same thing she did to Jena Bishop, and that's how I think she wins the fight. That's kind of it. I do think that she's going to be able to out-grapple Liz Carmouche. On the feet, we saw Taila Santos give some trouble to Erin Blanchfield, who we do know isn't a very good striker, but it is what it is, and even had some movements on the feet, but to be fair, not many necessarily against Valentina Shevchenko. Where that success come from in the Shevchenko fight was in the grappling, and I think that's how she defeats Liz Carmouche. I think she does win by decision. I would be surprised if she can submit Liz Carmouche, but I think she gets it done using that grappling, and I think she does go out there and get offensive takedowns. Oleg Popov fights against Linton Vassell. Linton Vassell proved me wrong, big time, in his last fight. I genuinely believed we were going to see Valentin Moldavsky go out there and defeat Vassell, and Vassell got given a pretty close decision, but he won the fight. It is what it is. That was a rough one for me. I really believed that Moldavsky was going to beat Vassell. And before that, he did lose to Denis Goltsov, and what was kind of a weird fight, which Vassell was looking good in. Again, he was looking good against Goltsov, but then he shot for a takedown against a solid wrestler, gassed out, and then was reversed, and ended up completely gassing. And that's how he ended up losing the fight, was Goltsov was kind of tapping him with strikes. Unfortunately for Vassell, I actually think that Oleg Popov is probably one of the worst stylistic matchups for him. Popov is a wrestler, and that's kind of it, but the thing about him is he actually is a very good wrestler, and that's a lot of trouble for a lot of people, especially at heavyweight. And he's found a lot of success in Bellator and also in the PFL. He was fighting for MMA series and he beat Bigfoot. It's just sad, isn't it? I think he did it on the feet as well to make it worse. But goes out there against Gokhan Sarakam, a pretty dynamic, athletic heavyweight striker like Vassell is, won that fight by decision, and then beat Steve Murray in a very impressive win by doing that in the PFL. Finished him with, it wasn't the best performance, but he won it. And it wasn't most exciting. He won it though, and then he beat Davion Franklin, who fought him on short notice. And I actually didn't break down that fight because Oleg Popov had multiple different opponent changes for that Franklin fight, and unfortunately that just kind of is what it is with the PFL. Every now and then fights get switched out, and pretty regularly too, but I didn't break that one down. Popov won it once again with his wrestling. Linton Vassell, I've said it before and I'll say it again, he's a very dynamic guy for heavyweight, and I think that's where he's found a lot of his success, is by being a fast heavyweight, a fast guy on the feet. And now he's 41 years old, and I think that's where we've finally started to see that go, and that's why I did pick him to lose to Moldavsky. We've finally really started to see Linton Vassell slow down due to that age factor. He lost to Denis Goltsov, he gassed out. Before that, a lot of success in Bellator, man. I think that we're going to see Oleg Popov go out there. I think he is going to be able to get the takedowns against Linton Vassell, and I think he's going to win the fight. I'm going to say third round TKO, honestly. I mean, he was able to finish Steve Murray. I think he should, he should be able to finish Linton Vassell. I'm going to say Popov, third round TKO. Vassell gassed out earlier. I think he probably gasses out again. Now we have Dakota Ditcheva fighting Jena Bishop. I'm going to put my hand up and say I wasn't really a Ditcheva believer. Well, that rhymed way too good. Because I really thought that it was going to be between Taila Santos and Liz Carmouche to win it all. But Dakota Ditcheva has looked so impressive recently. I actually think she might have her name in the hat to win it all. So that's what makes things very interesting. Now, I will admit she probably hasn't actually fought the same level of competition that Taila Santos and Liz Carmouche have had to fight, and Jena Bishop, including that Taila Santos fight, because her win was over Chelsea Hackett, who is a former Contender Series fight, took a lot of time away, come back to the PFL. Long story short, 4-2. And then Lisa Molden, I believe she was an older fighter, 6-3. Like, she's not fighting top 15 former UFC contender Taila Santos, but it is what it is. She's been looking incredible doing it. Man, she's a good striker. She probably is one of the best pure strikers right now at women's 125 pounds. And if she was able to win the whole tournament, I'd be very confident in saying that she probably is like top 4, top 3 strikers at women's 125. It's actually quite incredible how fast she is on the feet, and she mixes it up, and she's got power. That's the thing as well, I think that a lot of people don't necessarily have in this weight class, is the power and the speed. But she takes on a very difficult matchup, in my opinion, in Jena Bishop, because Jena Bishop, she's no slouch on the ground, man. Now, on the feet, I would say she's definitely no match for Ditcheva on the feet. But what can make things interesting is just because of the submission threat is so prevalent and the potential fear of being taken down is there, maybe Ditcheva isn't going to fight the same on the feet as she has against girls in the past, where she has been able to know that they're not going to take her down and be confident in her striking. I believe Jena Bishop is she might not be a former world champion, I thought she was, but she's definitely an international level grappler. I'll put that label out there because I don't think I could be wrong in saying that. And she transferred all of that BJJ skill to MMA, and she has done it recently. She fought as soon as 2021 as her debut, and she's looked very good since then. LFA picked her up, then Bellator picked her up, and then PFL picked her up. She is a nightmare matchup for Dakota Ditcheva, but I think that the threat on the feet just isn't there. And Ditcheva is still very tall for the weight class. She's 5'8". Jena Bishop is 5'4", but if you do watch her fight, she still is like pretty good size for women's 125. She didn't look too small against Taila Santos at all. And then Chelsea Hackett, in that matchup, actually, she threw up the armbar from on bottom. Chelsea Hackett, I believe, was actually given some trouble on the feet and then shot for the takedown. and then got arm buttons. The fight IQ, man. That's the same sort of thing happened against Chelsea Hackett. That was another one. But anyway, it is what it is for Ditcheva. I'm going to go with Ditcheva. I actually do think she's going to win this one, and I think she's going to win it by knockout, man. I've been very, very impressed, actually, by how good Ditcheva truly is, because I did know, of course, who she was. And I believe she actually has world championship level kickboxing experience. But she was signed to the PFL, and then she just kind of really was given some very easy wins in the PFL Europe. So I was like, man, like, is it going to translate over? And I believe it is going to. And I think this is really the first big test, like the huge test of her career. So I wish her the best of luck. And we might see her versus Taila Santos or Liz Carmouche in the finals. And that would be huge. Now, Denis Goltsov versus Tim Johnson is now headlining the event. I like Goltsov in this matchup, and I actually feel pretty good about it, even after watching Tim Johnson fight against Danilo Marques. If you haven't seen the fight, you probably have seen a highlight of that fight, where Tim Johnson, I'm pretty confident it was a huge overhand left, lands a massive overhand left, flush, clean at the exact time that Danilo Marques kicks him in the groin. So he lands this flush shot. Marques drops to the floor, gets up and he's all wobbly, and Tim Johnson is folded over because he's just gotten kicked in the groin. The fight ends pretty shortly after that. Tim Johnson does knock him out, but I thought that was funny. You guys have probably seen it. Hopefully you found that funny as well, but I do like Goltsov in the matchup. Johnson, even though he did knock out Marques and he did have a good performance, I still thought he looked slow. And like that is Tim Johnson. Like he's not like he's not a Linton Vassell at heavyweight, you know, is what I'm trying to say. He's no Francis Ngannou. He does finish Marques in the first round, but I still did think that he looked quite slow on the feet. And I think that's going to be a problem against Denis Goltsov, because this guy has a lot of power, and he has a pretty sad amount of power. Because if you watch the fight against Thiago Santos, the way that he drops Thiago Santos, it's just sad to see. Now, to be fair, I never really was the biggest fan of Thiago Santos, but I do know that he does have fans, and watching that fight probably makes you feel pretty sad. Santos comes charging him, and then Goltsov, it looks like he doesn't even hit him. Like, he just kind of, like, throws, like, the tightest little hook clean on Santos, and he drops to the floor, and then gets finished with the control time that Goltsov was able to rack up. It was a sad performance for Santos, but it just tells you how much power Goltsov has. He knocked out Yorgan de Castro in 18 seconds. A hilarious knockout win if you haven't seen it. It was pretty brutal as well. And it was really kind of this year in 2023, I actually thought that he was going to win it all. But then he lost to Renan Ferreira. I'm pretty sure I actually picked Goltsov to win it in that one year. And if he won it, he probably would have fought Ngannou, because apparently Ferreira is going to fight against Ngannou soon. I think Goltsov can win. Goltsov can wrestle. He can grapple. He can strike. And he's got a lot of power. Johnson's best chance to win this fight is I think he's just going to have to land a massive shot and knock out Goltsov. Yes, Johnson can get scrappy on the feet. Johnson can get scrappy on the feet. Yes, he can wrestle. But at this point, he is going to be the much slower fighter. And I think Goltsov, man, like Goltsov is huge. He's 6'5". He's a massive heavyweight. And boy, does he pack a lot of power in his hands. I think we are going to see Goltsov go up there and knock out Tim Johnson, but I guess it's a big opportunity for Johnson, who I believe is stepping up on short notice, because Denis Goltsov was actually originally slated. No, sorry guys, I was going to talk about Oleg Popov. I think Oleg Popov was actually originally slated to fight against Moldavsky, but since they are friends, they didn't want to fight against each other, and Moldavsky actually pulled out. However, I think it's because they didn't want to fight each other. I'll be honest. But hey, I'm not going to put that out there. I think that Goltsov wins the finals, the final fight of the card. Do I think he can get past Popov? That's going to make things interesting. But let me know what you think in the comments below. It's a big card. It's a fun card. I'm looking forward to it. And let me know if you agree or disagree with any of my picks. It should be a good one. I'll see you guys in the next video.